I want to thank my second father, my mom's coworker. He is my real role model. And shout out to the guy who just pays the bills. My stepson humiliated me at his graduation. My wife called it a joke. So I erased his Harvard future and gave the fun to someone worthy. The microphone crackled once, and then silence. A crowd of parents in pressed suits and floral dresses held their phones high, trying to capture what should have been the proudest moment of my life. Instead, I watched my stepson clear his throat and smile smugly into the microphone. I want to thank my mother, he said, glancing at Celia, who was beaming from the front row as if she had just won something. And of course, my second father, Mr. Whitaker. You've been the real role model in my life. There it was. Some people chuckled, others clapped. I didn't blink. But then came the stab. And hey, Evan added, half turning to me in the crowd. A shout out to the guy who paid the bills. The laughter was louder this time, genuine, unfiltered, humiliating. I just sat there. Back row, center seat, tweed jacket. The tie slightly crooked from the rush I had made earlier not to miss the ceremony. No one noticed. No one cared. Certainly not the boy I had raised as my own for 18 years. 18 years. Every orthodontist appointment. Every Friday night flu. Every 3 a.m. nightmare. When he was 5 and thought a shadow on the wall was a monster, it was always me, not with his designer cufflinks and his arrogant weekly work dinners with my wife. It wasn't the man in the back row with the same shoes he wore when Evan called him Dad for the first time. The crowd was still laughing. His friends were patting him on the back as the microphone was handed over and he stepped down from the stage, raising his fist as if he had just dropped a killer joke. I smiled only once. Not with my mouth, not really. More like a twitch at the corner of my eye. The kind of smile people mistake for understanding or humility. But it wasn't that. It was the smile of a man who had just remembered everything. If you're still listening and you're part of the 90% who haven't subscribed yet, this is your moment. Help our small team continue to bring you stories like this. You won't believe how far this one goes. Back to the humiliation. Celia didn't look at me when she returned to her seat next to me. Her phone was already in her hand, probably texting Whiter. Wasn't he adorable? Maybe with a laughing emoji. She didn't even give me a glance. Great speech, I muttered. She tilted her head towards me, half laughing. Oh, come on. It was a joke. Don't be so dramatic. Joke. That word hurt more than the speech. The ceremony continued monotonously. Honor cords, scholarships, handshakes with professors in ridiculous robes. But I didn't hear a word. My ears were buzzing. Not with anger. That would have been easy, right? This was something colder, quieter, like hearing the sound of a lock clicking shut behind you. As we walked out to the parking lot, Evan passed me as if I were the valet. His friends surrounded him, and Celia was already on the arm of her co-workers, pointing at Whiter as if he were family. No one asked me to take pictures. No one handed me a cap or a stole and said, get in the photo. I wasn't invisible. It was worse. I was decorative. We got home around 9. I went straight to the garage. Silent, careful steps, like walking through a church you used to believe in. In the farthest corner, under a pile of Christmas decorations and in used camping gear, was the fireproof black box I hadn't opened in over a year. I wiped the dust from the lid with my sleeve and opened the lock. Inside, a folder of documents, a key, and a cashier's check for $250,000 made out to Harvard University. Signed, certified, still valid. I stared at the amount, $250,000 I had been saving since Evan was in 8th grade, cutting back on everything: my truck, my vacations, my health. Frankly, all for a future I thought I was building for someone who respected the foundations beneath their feet. I took out the check, sat with it in my hand, then put it back in the folder, closed the box, locked it, and placed it on the shelf. Not in the corner this time, but in the center. Some things don't need to be burned to be erased. Some things just need to remain sealed. I looked around the garage, taking in all the pieces of my small, quiet life. Tools I bought secondhand, shelves I built myself, even the dent in the wall from Evan's failed skateboard trick. Then I went back inside. No one noticed I had been gone. Celia was pouring herself a glass of wine, laughing at something Whiter had posted online. Evan was on the couch, texting someone, probably one of the girls who had complimented him after the ceremony. I didn't say a word, but something had changed silently and permanently, because while they were celebrating Evan's future, I had just rewritten it. The champagne bottle popped like a gunshot in the dining room, and everyone cheered. Celia toasted with Evan and Whiter as if they were the three musketeers, beaming over a crystal centerpiece that I had paid for, but whose name I couldn't say. I stood near the back, holding a half-full glass I hadn't drunk from. The bubbles went flat before I raised it. To Evan, Whittaker toasted, and to Harvard. Applause, laughter. Evan took a mock bow, soaking in the glow as if he himself had built the path he was walking on. He hadn't. I had. 18 years of sleepless nights and early mornings, packed lunches, attended illnesses, rent paid, insurance handled, tutors arranged. None of it was flashy, just steady, reliable, unmemorable, and now, apparently, unnecessary. I slipped away during the cake cutting. My stomach felt like I had swallowed glass. I told Celia I needed something from the study. She didn't even look up from her phone. She was swiping through pictures of Van posing with White with his hand on his shoulder like a proud father, like a man who had earned that right. The door closed behind me, muffling the laughter. I sat at my desk, reached for the drawer I hadn't opened in years. Van's old school photos were still there. His first-grade portrait, toothless and with a crooked tie. His fifth-grade science fair ribbon. I had stayed up with him until 2 a.m. gluing that volcano with hot glue. Piano recital programs, a middle school Father's Day card with a drawing of me as Superman. The same hand that drew that card had just handed me a sentence that would stay stuck in my ribs until the day I died, thanks to the guy who paid the bills. The desk light flickered once. I turned the card over and looked at my own name written in green marker. Dad. Apparently that title had an expiration date. Behind me, the door creaked. Celia leaned against the frame with a glass of wine in her hand. You disappeared, she said with false concern. Everything okay? I looked at her without saying anything. She sighed. Oh, come on. It was just a joke. He didn't mean it maliciously. That word again, joke. The verbal dumpster of cruelty. Throw your worst words in there, put on a smile, and hit the button. Don't be so sensitive, she added with a hint of amusement in her voice, as if she were offering therapy to a child who had scraped his knee. I closed the desk drawer. You know, she continued, swirling her drink. You always get weird at events. Try to enjoy the moment. Okay. I didn't answer. She left without pressing. After the door closed again, I sat in silence. The kind of silence that isn't measured in minutes, but in revelations. Something had ended. Not loudly, not with a scream or a slam, just subtly, like a rope going slack. I finally stood up, walked out, down the hall, through the kitchen, past the laughter and the jokes about Harvard and the clinking of glasses to the garage. The box was still where I had left it, fireproof, sealed, untouched since the day I deposited the last transfer. I opened it slowly, reverently. Inside, a clean, cold envelope, a cashier's check for $250,000 made out to Harvard. My crisp signature at the bottom. I had had it ready for months. I had double-checked the tuition calendars. I had coordinated it with the housing and meal plans. Financial aid covered almost nothing. Evan had botched the FAFSA application by including Celia's income but omitting mine. He didn't even know how much he needed me. Or maybe he did, and he just assumed I would respond as I always did. But assumptions have an expiration date, and I had just reached mine. I looked at the check. For a moment, I imagined walking into his room and giving it to him, letting him hug me with that performative sincerity he used for social media posts. Letting him take it, letting him win. But then I thought of Whiter's hand on his shoulder. Celia's little smile when she said, "Don't be so sensitive." The microphone, the laughter, the heat on my face as I sat in the back row, invisible in plain sight. I put the check back in the envelope, closed the lid, and locked the box again. And this time I didn't put it in the corner. I placed it in the center of the workbench, right in the middle, like a reminder. Because sometimes revenge doesn't need to explode, it just needs to simmer. And I had just turned on the fire. The sunlight cut through the trees like knives. One of those unusually warm mornings that fools everyone into believing the world is still kind. Our backyard was crowded with white folding chairs, pastel-colored tablecloths, cheap champagne glasses, and conversations I wasn't part of. The brunch was Celia's idea. Just a small celebration with work friends, she had said. Her work friends, obviously. Evan didn't object. Neither did I. Whiter was there again. Of course. His hair too dark for his age, his teeth too white for someone who smokes as much as he does. He was pouring mimosas as if he lived there, as if this were his backyard, his son, his wife. And maybe, in some silent, disgusting way, it was. Evan was by his side, clinking glasses with White as if they were fraternity brothers. "You always have my back," I heard him say, laughing much harder than anyone ever did. A pause. "You know what I mean?" White laughed like a man who had already won. Celia pretended not to hear him, but I caught the little smile at the edge of her mouth. One of those thin, satisfied lines that isn't quite a smile. Not happy, just smug. I was standing by the sliding door, holding a small envelope. Inside was a card, a handwritten message I had spent an hour drafting the night before. "Congratulations." And a cashier's check for $1,000. Not the tuition money, just a gesture, a seed. My name signed at the bottom. I stepped forward. "Evan," I said, offering it to him. He glanced over his shoulder. He took the envelope with the kind of grip you use to pass napkins. "Thanks," he muttered without eye contact, without a smile, without curiosity. He didn't open it. He just stuffed it in his pocket and turned back to Whiter. I stood there a second longer than I should have, long enough for it to hurt. Then I nodded to no one in particular and went back inside. In the kitchen, I washed a clean plate, dried it, washed it again. The kind of pointless task you do when the alternative is screaming inside your own skull. I went upstairs, closed the door to my study, sat in the desk chair that creaks if I lean too far to the left, and opened the tab I hadn't clicked on in over a year. The Education Fund. Balance $257,412.68. I looked at it as if it were a crime scene. Every cent had come from my salary. Nothing from Celia. And Whiter certainly hadn't contributed a dime. I changed the password. First step. Then I opened a separate account under a different trust. Silent. Controlled. The beneficiary. Grace Marshall. She didn't know me yet. I started the transfer. Not all of it, just enough to break the illusion. $250,000. Exactly what Harvard had budgeted in their letter. Once the funds cleared, I printed the transaction receipt, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the drawer under Evan's old science fair ribbon. Not for drama, just to keep a record. Control isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a series of very deliberate, very quiet steps that lead to a place no one expects until the door closes behind them. Downstairs, someone popped another bottle. Laughter erupted. I heard Whiter's voice. Something about raising a glass to Harvard's next great mind. No one raised a glass for me. No one even looked up when I walked out to my car and drove away. I didn't tell Celia I was going to the hardware store. I didn't say I'd be back in an hour because I wasn't sure if I would be. I sat in the car for a long time with the key in the ignition, the engine off, just watching our house from the curb, seeing the silhouettes of people celebrating a version of the world that didn't need me. Maybe it never did, but it needed my money, and that part was over. They just didn't know it yet. The office was colder than I remembered. Or maybe I was just finally aware of the temperature now that my blood wasn't boiling every second. I hadn't seen Alan, my estate lawyer, in almost 3 years. The last time we spoke was to update my living will after Celia, and I refinanced the house to help pay for Evan's future. She had insisted. "It's not debt, it's an investment," she had chirped. Alan stood up when I walked in, surprised. "Daniel, I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I'm redirecting the legacy," I said. That made him raise an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied calmly, "that the Harvard Fund is no longer going to Harvard. And definitely not to Evan." Alan blinked once. "Are you serious?" I nodded. As death. He leaned back in his chair. "Okay, show me what you've got." I slid the folder across the desk. Inside was a complete printout of the educational trust one had built for 18 years. A timeline of every deposit, every reinvested dividend, and a name written at the top of a new application. Grace Evely Marshall. "Who's that?" he asked. "The daughter of the night janitor at the firm where Celia used to intern. Smart, quiet, accepted to MIT, no way to pay for it. Her mother has 2 jobs. Her father passed away from lung cancer 2 years ago." Alan gave me a look. "How do you know all that?" I shrugged. I read her application essays. I still get the scholarship board updates that Celia filters straight to the trash. They mentioned her as a finalist for a regional grant she didn't get. "Not many people would do this," Alan muttered, scanning the papers. "Yes," I said. "That's the point. We set up the scholarship that day discreetly, without press, under a pseudonym. The Evely Legacy Award, for first-generation college students only, with a priority for science and engineering students. He asked if I wanted to inform Grace directly. No, I said. Let the school handle it. I want her to open that email and feel like someone out there saw her. No name, just help. By the time I left that building, $250,000 had been moved, not as punishment, but with precision. Across town, I imagined Evan lying on the sofa with a PlayStation controller in his hand, bragging about how the funds were ready and loaded. Probably telling someone, Celia has it all under control, repeating whatever lie she had told him about her financial confidence, and she was lying again. A few nights earlier, I heard her whispering on the phone with the door slightly ajar. No, Daniel hasn't said anything. It's fine, why? He's predictable. Harvard is paid for through the end of the semester. We're fine, predictable, maybe once. That night, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched since before the wedding. Inside was the only picture I had left of my sister, Evely, at 17. Her graduation cap too big for her head. We were kids. She died at 19. Car accident, no seatbelt, no second chance. She wanted to be a robotics engineer, but never made it to college. I ran my thumb over the edge of the photo, then put it away under the scholarship documents in my safe. It felt right, quietly right. Meanwhile, Celia posted a picture of Evan on Facebook smiling in a Harvard sweatshirt next to Whiter. The caption read, "So proud of our future scientist. Big brains and even bigger hearts run in the family. Blue heart heading to Harvard, proud mom blessed." There wasn't a single mention of me. I looked at it for exactly 4 seconds and then closed the app. The next morning, Grace's mother received an email she read 3 times before she believed it. A full tuition scholarship, room, board, books, a stipend, a laptop allowance. No strings attached, just one sentence at the end. This opportunity is made possible by a private donor who believes in your daughter's future. That night, while Celia poured herself another glass of wine and Evan bragged to his friends about joining the Crimson Robotics team in the fall, I was sitting in my car across from Grace's neighborhood, not watching, just remembering what real hope looked like. The house was old, the siding faded, rust along the gutter, but the porch light was on. And through the curtain, I saw Grace at the kitchen table with her laptop open, reading something with her hand over her mouth. She didn't scream, she didn't dance, she just closed her eyes and smiled. That was all I needed. Celia didn't scream at first. That would come later. Initially, it was a sound more like an animal getting its paw caught in a trap. A sharp intake of breath, a pause, and then the distinct, furious tapping of acrylic nails on a phone screen. I watched from the hallway, out of her sight. She squinted at her laptop and muttered, "That can't be right." It was a Tuesday. Morning light spilled across the kitchen tiles. The smell of her burnt espresso still hung in the air. She had opened her email during breakfast and frozen on one line. Final notice. Second tuition payment overdue. Harvard University. She looked at it as if it were a joke. She refreshed the page, checked the spam folder, reloaded, and again, system error. She muttered as if repeating it would make the server apologize. Then she called Evan. I heard the speakerphone activate. "Hey, Mom. What's up? Did you get anything from Harvard today?" No. They say the second tuition payment is overdue." A pause. Then Van's voice, more irritated than concerned. "Wait, what? I thought Dad already took care of that." "I thought so too," she snapped, turning to her phone on the counter. The panic was real now. That dawning, desperate realization that maybe, just maybe, the foundations weren't as solid as she had assumed, and that maybe the man she treated like a piece of furniture had just moved the entire floor under her feet. "Call him," Evan said. Maybe he forgot. She rolled her eyes as if the idea offended her. "He doesn't forget, not when it comes to money. Although he has been acting weird, just call him." She did. My phone rang twice before I answered. I was in my study reviewing the receipts for Grace's laptop fund. "Daniel," Celia said, skipping the pleasantries. "We got an email from Harvard." I didn't ask what it said. I already knew. She continued, her voice tense. "They say the second payment is overdue. You said you would take care of it." I could hear Evan in the background. "Put him on speaker." She did. "Evan." He spoke first. "Dad, did you forget to send the payment?" I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the leaf blower across the street. Calmly, I said, "No." "Evan." "Wait, so you sent it?" "No," I repeated. "I didn't forget." "What?" I finally remembered. Silence. Two confused breaths on the other end of the line. Then I hung up without drama, without raising my voice, just a statement. I finally remembered. 5 minutes later, Celia's name lit up my screen again. I ignored it. Then Evan, then Celia again, then an unknown number. I kept ignoring it. Finally, the buzzing stopped. In the silence, I went downstairs, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the breakfast table. The same seat I used to occupy every morning when Evan was in high school. The same view of the backyard, the same fridge with his childhood drawings still held by magnets to the door, like relics of a life they had outgrown. But I hadn't. Upstairs, Celia's voice grew frantic. "He's playing a game," she hissed, trying to prove a point. "That's what it is." Evan wasn't so sure. "But why now?" "Because he's resentful. He's always been jealous of how close you and Wider are. He's being petty. I should email the university." "No," she snapped. "Let me talk to what? We'll sort it out." I smiled. "Yes, go talk to Wider. Let the man who called me Dan the doormat behind my back try to fill in the gaps I had silently erased." Later that afternoon, Evan texted me. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out Grace's acceptance package from the drawer. I read the words I had already memorized. I saw her name in bold at the top. Grace Evely Marshall. Class of 2027. No overdue notice, no final warning, just gratitude in a path someone else thought was impossible until someone remembered her. Meanwhile, in a house I once felt was mine, confusion was turning into suspicion. And suspicion, I knew, was just the warm-up act. The real show was yet to come. The restaurant they chose was predictable, trendy, expensive, quiet enough to whisper insults behind polished smiles. Celia texted me the address as if it were an invitation to a truce, but I knew it wasn't. The moment I saw Wider already sitting in the corner booth, sipping an old-fashioned like an arrogant little warlord, I knew this wasn't peace. It was positioning. "Daniel," Celia said as I approached, her voice sweetened with rehearsed concern. "Thanks for coming." Wider didn't stand, just nodded as if he were doing me a favor. "Hey, Dan." I took my seat slowly, letting my coat slide off my shoulders as if I had all the time in the world. I did. They didn't. Celia fired the first shot. "We wanted to clear the air. There's been a misunderstanding." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "You know Van didn't mean it," she said, leaning forward. "He was joking. You've been in his life since he was in diapers. You're his father, Daniel. That doesn't just go away because he said something stupid into a microphone." Wida chimed in. "Ever the mediator. He needs you, man. Whatever is going on, put it aside for the kid. You raised him. He's yours too." I took a sip of water. I let the silence linger. Then, with a faint smile, I said, "That's what I thought until last Saturday." Celia stiffened. Wider blinked. "Excuse me." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a plain manila envelope. I slid it across the table. "Simple, no drama." "What's this?" Celia asked. "The proof," I said, "of everything I no longer owe you." Wider opened it expecting a check, a plea. Instead, he found the withdrawal slips, the full reallocations, the holds, the legal confirmation of the trust's new beneficiary, Alan's notary stamp on the final transfer. "What the hell is this?" Whittaker muttered, his voice cracking for the first time. "I moved the funds," I said matter-of-factly, "all of them a while ago." "What did you do?" "What?" Celia snapped. "I didn't steal. I didn't hide anything. I used my money, my name, my work for a future I believe in." "You're ruining his life over a speech," she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "You two did that part. I'm just making sure someone else gets the life you all pretended to value." Wider threw the envelope on the table as if it were poisoned. "This isn't legal. It's airtight." I replied. "Alan made sure." Celia's hands were shaking. She didn't reach for her wine, didn't look at Wider, just stared at me as if I had just rewritten a language she thought only she could speak. "I don't believe you," she whispered. "You would just throw him away like that?" I stood up. "You mean like you threw me away at that graduation?" Her lips parted without a sound. Wider leaned back as if he had just remembered a meeting he wanted to miss. I straightened my collar. "You taught him well, Celia. How to fake loyalty while you profit from someone else's sacrifice. How to wear pride like a costume and discard it the moment it gets wrinkled. Evan didn't learn that from me." Celia's eyes finally met mine. "So that's it, isn't it?" I said, "Finally, that's it." Then I walked out without raising my voice, without slamming doors, just step over polished tiles, silent, and steady. Outside, the air smelled of honeysuckle and exhaust fumes. I stood by my car for a moment, breathing it in. In the rearview mirror, I saw the maitre d' handing them the bill. The funny thing about expensive places is they don't care who raised whom. They only care who pays. And I wasn't paying anymore. The call came at 8:41 a.m. on a Thursday. Evan's name on the screen. Already 3 missed calls that morning. I let it ring. At 8:44, I answered. Not because I was curious. I already knew why he was calling. Harvard doesn't wake up quietly, and Evan had lived his whole life assuming someone else would keep his safety net taut and invisible. This was the moment he realized it was gone. His voice broke before he finished the first sentence. Dad, they say I'm not enrolled. I said nothing. They sent an email and they called. They say the funds for the semester didn't come through. They've taken away my housing. I have to be out by Monday. I don't understand. Yes, you do. I said flatly. I mean, can you call them? Fix it. They're not broken. There was a pause, a short, breathy silence. I could hear the panic rising, bubbling under the surface like a pot about to boil. They say if the payment isn't made by tomorrow at noon, my spot is gone. I lose everything, please. I waited for the word. The one that never came. Not a. I'm sorry. Not a. I was wrong. No acknowledgement of what he did or said, just please, as if I were a vending machine he didn't know he had kicked. I'm not the one who dropped you, I said, cold as ice. You did that with a microphone and a smile. Another pause, longer this time. Then the sound of the phone changing hands, and Celia's voice exploded through the speaker. Sharp, frantic, unhinged. What the hell is wrong with you? He's your son. No, I said evenly. He's your project. Daniel, he was a kid. He made a joke. No, you made a joke. You built a life where I was the wallet, the background noise. And when he repeated it in front of hundreds of people and cameras, you smiled. Celia didn't respond at first. Then came the sharp attempt at emotional blackmail. You're ruining his life for pride, for one stupid speech. No, I said, I'm just not going to finance the sequel. Evan's voice came back, shaky now. Dad, I didn't mean it like that. But you said it, I said. Didn't you? Silence. I didn't wait for an answer. I ended the call, and this time I blocked both numbers. Not for anger, for clarity. Outside, the leaves were starting to turn. Late September, crisp air. I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching the wind take the first yellow leaves from the maple tree across the street. A single notification vibrated on my laptop a few minutes later. An email from the Harvard Public Newsletter. Donor Spotlight. Evely Legacy Award helps deserving students study robotics at MIT. Grace's picture was attached. She was standing next to a circuit board, beaming, mid-sentence, midlife. Her smile didn't look performative, didn't look forced, it looked earned. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair. Somewhere, Evan was frantically refreshing his inbox, calling the financial aid office, pleading with a system that wasn't designed to fix arrogance. And for the first time in almost 2 decades, I didn't feel responsible. I felt finished. White's office was a glass sanctuary to self-importance. Floor-to-ceiling windows, leather chairs no one sat in, conference plaques he never attended, and a whiskey decanter that hadn't been full since 2016. He was pouring himself a drink when Celia burst in. Eyes blazing, phone in one hand, a printout in the other. You need to fix this, she said. She didn't ask, she demanded. Wider looked up slowly as if annoyed by the interruption, not yet understanding it was his own funeral she had just walked into. Fix what? Harvard has revoked Evan's enrollment. Housing, classes, everything. They're threatening permanent expulsion for non-payment. Wider raised his eyebrows like a cartoon villain. And Celia blinked. And you're the reason Daniel did this. You're the one who let that speech happen. The one who let Evan treat him like what he interrupted. Like a backup, like an ATM. She hesitated. He shrugged. He wasn't my kid. I never said he was. That was your husband. You want to blame someone? Try the mirror. Celia's voice dropped an octave. You encouraged it all. You let Van think you'd be there for him. I acted like he interrupted with a bitter laugh, like a guy who enjoys a free ride. But when it's time to pay, I don't sign. Daniel did. That was always the deal. You knew that, you arrogant bastard. Don't project your failed strategy on me, he said, standing up. You treated the man like a placeholder and expected him to die grateful. He just happened to have a spine. The silence after that sentence was lethal, but it didn't last long. By noon, The receptionist had overheard the argument. By 2 p.m., half the staff had repeated the details. By 3, clients were canceling meetings. Conflict of ethics, one wrote via email. Uncomfortable environment, another said. The firm's social media page turned off comments by 4:30. At 5, Whitaker had locked his office door and told his assistant not to put him through. No calls from Celia. Meanwhile, Evan was unraveling in real time. He posted a shaky video online. Just him, hood up, face pale. Hey guys, I know a lot of you have been asking what happened. I'm not dropping out. It's complicated. My stepdad, decided not to fund my tuition. I don't know why. He just cut me off. He didn't expect the response he got. The comments were not kind. You mean the guy who raised you? So you humiliate your stepdad in public and then cry when the money's gone. You mock the man who gave you everything. This is the guy who paid for your teeth, your private school, your everything. Bro, screenshots of Evan's graduation speech circulated again alongside the announcement of Grace's scholarship. Alongside my name. The contrast was brutal. Her, a first-generation admit to MIT. Him, the golden boy who mistook loyalty for obligation. And online, people started taking sides, and almost no one chose his. Celia tried to do damage control. She posted a filtered old photo of her and Evan at a baseball game. Family is forever. This too shall pass. She turned off comments in 5 minutes. Whitaker, in a desperate attempt to distance himself, posted a cryptic quote on LinkedIn the next day. Character is revealed when the spotlight goes out. The irony was almost Shakespearean. Evan deleted his video, then uploaded a new one. Comments off. Too late. The internet doesn't forget. Neither do people with receipts. And the ones Vin burned were the same ones now watching him shiver in the cold, wondering when he would realize. He hadn't been abandoned. He had just, finally, been left alone to stand on the ashes he himself had lit. It started as a local filler piece. A slow newsday sandwich between weather updates and city council drama. Anonymous donor pays MIT tuition for underprivileged teen. Grace's face was front and center, beaming, holding a certificate. Her mother beside her with tears in her eyes. The journalist noted that Grace had almost given up on mid due to the cost, that her parents had worked 2 and sometimes 3 jobs to support her, and that the donor insisted on no publicity. But secrets have an expiration date, especially the good ones. 3 days later, a follow-up piece appeared. The byline was different, the tone sharper. Engineer quietly diverts Harvard funds to janitor's daughter following public humiliation by stepson. That headline hit like a sledgehammer, and underneath there I was, smiling awkwardly at the awards ceremony next to Gracia and her mother in front of a plastic banner and a folding table with a tray of cold muffins, no designer suits, no speeches, just presence and proof. In 48 hours, it exploded. Reddit, Twitter, Facebook were sharing it with captions like, "This is what a real father does. Raised another man's son for 18 years, and they thanked him by mocking him. So he gave the money to someone who respected him." TikTok edits emerged. Clips of Evan's graduation speech overlaid with slow pans of the newspaper article, the meat banner, Grace hugging her mother. They synced his line, "Thanks to the guy who paid the bills," with the sound of a record scratch and captions like, "And boy did he." The contrast was brutal, unforgiving, poetic. Meanwhile, Van's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Commenters dug up every public post he had ever made about Harvard, about Whitaker, subs, real role model. They dissected it like a crime scene. They pointed out the entitlement, the passive disdain, the cruelty of his speech. Memes bloomed like weeds. Celia tried to do damage control. She claimed the story was taken out of context. She called it a smear campaign. She even hinted that the money had always been intended for charity, which only made things worse. Whitaker remained silent, deleted his LinkedIn, suspended his firm's social accounts. A major client was rumored to have quietly walked. "I didn't say a word, never gave an interview, never made a statement, just went back to my job." Grace sent a thank you email to which I replied with a single line. "Make it count." She wrote back, "I already am." A week later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. The shaky, looping letters. Evan had never mastered cursive, but he tried when he was nervous. The envelope was thick, too thick. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the kitchen counter for 2 days. I saw it out of the corner of my eye every time I made coffee. Passed it to check the thermostat, fed the dog. When I finally opened it, I didn't read the whole thing, just the first line. I didn't know. I didn't mean it, and that was enough. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and filed it in the cabinet under tax returns and insurance policies. Not for cruelty, for completeness. Evan's words, like so much in his life, had come too late, packaged too carefully, too focused on himself. But now they would sit forever in a drawer labeled what could have been between receipts and expired warranties. And I sat in silence, not victorious, just at peace, because the world had finally seen the truth, not the version Celia curated. No, the narrative Evan tried to sell. Just one moment, one gesture, and a girl who looked at a crowd and said, "Thank you," as if it meant everything. Because to her, it did, and to me, that was enough. The campus was quiet, as all good beginnings should be. Students in MIT sweatshirts moved quickly between buildings, clutching laptops and iced coffees, already immersed in a world they had fought to earn. Grace's dorm was on the far side of campus, not the newest, not the largest, but solid. Like her, I didn't call ahead. She didn't know I was coming. I didn't want gratitude, just confirmation. The coat I brought was navy, lined, warm enough to withstand Boston's October tantrums. I had asked her mother for Grace's size without explaining why. The toolkit was compact. Basic screwdriver, pliers, flashlight, duct tape. My kind of welcome kit. She wasn't there when I knocked on the door. It was fine. Even better. I left the items with the resident assistant and wrote her a short note. Things break. You fix them. You're made for this. Signed with a small D, I walked slowly back down the hall. Open doors revealed small, chaotic, hopeful universes. Overflowing laundry baskets, posters of galaxies, and protest slogans. Voices too excited to whisper. The scent of ramen and dry erase markers filled the air. God, it felt like potential, the real, earned, quiet, meaning-laden kind. As I opened the main door of the building, a student rushing in almost collided with me. "Sorry, sir," he said, and then, recognizing me from somewhere he couldn't place, added, "Thanks again." I nodded once, not for ego, just for acknowledgement. Outside, I paused on the steps. I looked out over the lawn, where students sat in circles with laptops open, pens flying, and somewhere inside that building, the girl I had chosen over the boy I raised was starting a life not built on appearance, but on persistence. Back home, the emails had stopped. Harvard had officially marked Eva's account as withdrawn due to non-enrollment and missed payment deadlines. No reinstatement approved. His Edu email address had disappeared. The digital tether had been severed. The house went on the market last week. Celia hadn't told me directly, but I saw the sign on a drive through the old neighborhood. A carousel of real estate photos filled with staged lies, fresh flowers, throw pillows, nothing to hint at the rot under the baseboards. I heard through Alan that Whiter had ghosted her. Cut off contact, quietly switched firms. His assistant leaked a voicemail, Celia, pleading with him to call her. "You said you would help." No response. The new partners were younger, cleaner. They didn't want a scandal magnet. He was yesterday's man. Evan posted once on his now private Instagram a blurry picture of a coffee cup and a notebook. Starting over. Some lessons cost more than tuition. Comments turned off. I didn't respond. Not for malice, for completeness. Why? What revenge could match this silence? What punishment better than knowing he couldn't manipulate, couldn't dodge, couldn't charm his way back into the life he mocked? He had every opportunity and squandered them all. Back on campus, I walked to the edge of the central quad before looking back one last time. The windows glowed faintly. One of them was hers. I imagined her reading the note, putting the code in her closet, smiling. Maybe without posting it, without performing, just living. The wind picked up, fresh, clean, and I smiled. Not because I had won, but because, for the first time, in a very, very long time, I had given something to someone who truly appreciated it.